Who's your commander?
Good luck.
Equip.
Move to combat.
Resolves.
Now, before you attack
Does
me,
anyone have an answer?
well played.
Good game.
Hello, I'm Jumbo Commander, and today I have a deck tech featuring Brago King Eternal. Brago King Eternal is the king of value. 2 white-blue for a 2/4 flying legendary spirit, and Brago says, when he deals combat damage to a player, exile any number of target non-land permanents you control and return those cards to the battlefield under their owner's control. So Brago's main ability is a selective blink when he deals combat damage to an opponent, which means that to take advantage of this powerful blinking ability, we want things that have enter the battlefield triggers. So we play creatures, artifacts that have ETB effects, and then Brago will blink them again, getting more enter the battlefield effects. So that's what we're going to focus on a lot, is these great enter the battlefield cards and how to support Brago with them. So let's just talk about all the value that comes with enter the battlefield effects. Well, one of the best things that you can do is draw cards. It's so much fun. So Mole Drifter draws you 2 cards, Blink It draws you 2 more, Wall of Omens draws you a card, Ichor Wellspring draws you a card, Seagate Oracle has some selection, you end up with a card in your hand, Sphinx of Athun, Factor Fictions on ETB. This is a great amount of card draw, and all of these are really valuable cards that we would play in a normal commander deck. But when you pair them with Brago and blink them in and out every turn, you have card advantage that can be really hard to overcome. But your key creatures will die, and so a different kind of card advantage can be found in Recursion. Karmic Guide, Revelark, Sun Titan, these guys have great triggers. Pay attention specifically to Revelark because it has a leaves the battlefield trigger instead of an enters the battlefield trigger. Still works with Brago and all sorts of stuff, but it'll have a little bit of a different timing going on. It's also worth mentioning that with the sacrifice outlet, Revelark and Karmic Guide do create a combination. Let's look at a little bit of enter the battlefield removal. Active Authority, 1 white for an enchantment, and when Active Authority enters the battlefield, you may exile target artifact or enchantment. There is more text. It says that you can get rid of something else, but then Active Authority moves to that opponent. Let's not do that. Instead, let's just keep blinking Active Authority in and out, and then keep exiling target artifact or enchantment. Nevermaker is really strong and very oppressive. It has an exits the battlefield trigger, but when it leaves play, put target non-land permanent on top of its owner's library. Oh, this is so annoying. You can just take something random that your opponent has and replace their next draw with it. You can kind of lock your opponents out of their draw if they're kind of stuck a little bit and you keep putting things on top of their library. You know, sometimes I've never makered someone a few times and they're just like, you know what, I refuse to play any cards, refuse to play anything so I can at least get a real draw step. It's so damaging. And Spine of Ishsa. 7 mana is a lot to destroy a permanent, but when you flicker that every single turn, you can start hitting lands. It's mean. Now, there isn't a lot of hard removal in these colors, but we can see that there's some powerful cards. There is a lot of tempo-based removal, so let's talk about some of the strong bounce found in Azorius. Venser Shaper Savant can bounce a spell too, but more importantly, it's a permanent, so you can start bouncing lands, bouncing all sorts of stuff. Reflector Mage only can target a creature, but it gives you a tempo boost because that creature can't be cast next turn. Manowar also is a classic. Jellyfish, what a great creature type, returns a creature to its hand. Riftwing Cloudskate can come down early as suspend, but once he's going, you return target permanent. Again, being able to target a permanent is really cool because you can get like planeswalkers and lands can be really important too, because a lot of the reason why you have bounce is so that you can get Brago in for damage, because Brago needs to hit your opponent to get trigger. So you bounce their flyer, and then you trigger and then you get all your value. Sometimes they have a Mazavith. And so having a Riftwing Cloudskate or a Venser to bounce the Mazavith to be able to get your Brago in for damage could be really powerful. And partially, everyone knows Brago's trigger is really powerful, blinking everything you have, so it's likely to get Mazavithed even if you're not attacking the Mazavith player. How about this trigger, Resolute Archangel? It puts you back to 40 life, and you can blink it, and puts you back to 40 life. How do you lose? Altar of the Brood is not a good blink target itself, but if you were blinking everything else on the battlefield, Altar of the Brood will have a substantial amount of milling. Milling can be good because of cards like Diluvian Primordial, which has an insane enter the battlefield ability, allowing you to pick spells out of your opponent's graveyard. Oh, this guy is so good in so many decks, and not that expensive. Thalia's Lancers can fetch up any legendary out of your deck, including Planeswalkers now, huh? And Recruiter of the Guard tutors up creatures with low toughness. You know, pumping out tokens is a really great enter the battlefield strategy. Blade Splicer can be blinked turn after turn, creating an army of golems. Or Myr Battlesphere can create a bunch of Myrs. And when you keep producing more and more Myrs, you can eventually just kind of tap them all and drain someone out, fireball someone out with your Myr Battlesphere. This is a little bit of a slower strategy because it takes 7 mana and then many turns to blink, but it's a very powerful card to flood the battlefield. Magic fact. Did you know that there are 1,142 different cards in Azorius that have enter the battlefield abilities? There are so many of them. I'm not covering them all, but I did give you some important categories, and also I'm going to be hitting up on some themes that are really important. You kind of heard me talk about some of them, things like value, controlling the board, but also getting things out of the way so that Brago can hit, and finding ways to protect Brago. So we're going to be looking at a lot of those different strategies. You know, throwing Panharmonicon in here is just going to be a slam dunk. I think it's a really solid card. One thing you do need to pay attention to is it says artifact or creature. So that means if you have cool enchantments, they're not going to have that double trigger. There are a few other ways that we can heighten the Brago strategy, and that's Deadeye Navigator. You're not flickering this itself. You're using Deadeye to flicker other stuff. So it's not as powerful as a Brago that's really attacking every turn, but it's powerful in a different way because you can pair it with a single creature that you really need those triggers and use it multiple times per turn. And Stronach Resonator can copy these enter the battlefield abilities, or it can just go crazy with Brago and win you the game out of nowhere. This is an important combo that I think you should be aware of, so I'm going to take a few minutes to explain it. So the first thing you need is Brago King Eternal on the battlefield. He's your general, and he's a key piece of this combination. Let's also have the Stronach Resonator we were talking about, and any mana rock. I'm going to use a Soul Ring because it's the most simple to demonstrate the loop, but a lot of other mana rocks will work as well. I'm just going to explain the loop without anything else in it, but we can add more pieces to this combo to make it more powerful. So when we have our commander, let's go attacking. And hopefully we attack a person that's open because we want to deal combat damage, because Brago's trigger will go onto the stack. When Brago King Eternal deals combat damage to a player, exile any number of target non-land permanents you control, then return those cards to the battlefield under their owner's control. We get to blink whatever we want. Now, we're not going to blink these untapped artifacts. Let's go ahead and activate Stronach Resonator, and that puts this ability on the stack. Copy target triggered ability you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. We're going to copy Brago's triggered ability because it's a great ability. So that goes away, and we have a Brago trigger. Now we have 2 Brago triggers on the stack. Well, we can go ahead and resolve one of them and exile these 2 artifacts. And of course they come back, but they come back untapped. Now that we've resolved that Brago trigger, we still have one left on the stack, the original one. Well, what we can do now is do it all over again. Tap the Soul Ring, tap the Stronach Resonator, and then copy the original Brago trigger. That just doesn't do very much, but as soon as we add another element to this combination, well, like a Riftwing Cloudskate, that also can be exiled and re-enter the battlefield every single time we cycle through this. That means that we can get infinite blinks on this Riftwing Cloudskate and bounce every permanent on the battlefield back to the owner's hands. This is not a Cyclonic Rift. We're talking about lands too. This is a crippling combination. We can also use a Gilded Lotus instead of a Soul Ring, and then that will net us some mana. We might have a mana sink or something good to use the mana for. Or we can have a Mold Drifter and draw our entire deck, or choose when to stop. We can even blink Jace the Mind Sculptor because we can blink any non-land permanent. But this is all happening at instant speed, and Planeswalker activations are at sorcery speed. Now this happens at instant speed because we have to have that Brago trigger still on the stack to copy. Everything needs to be instants, and so even though we can reset Jace the Mind Sculptor's loyalty to 3, we have to wait until our second main phase when we have sorcery speed available to actually activate it. Now I hope that helped a lot explaining that combination. Stronach Resonator is kind of a difficult card to conceptualize because it copies triggers, and triggers are things that we kind of have to keep in our mind rather than something we can visualize on the battlefield. I also have to warn you that this deck is dirtily, and so a lot of times you might end up winning with Stronach Resonator if it is in your deck. And when you combo off with a Stronach Resonator, sometimes all you do is bounce everything back to their hand with the Riftwing Cloudskate, and then you have a 2/4 and a 2/2 on the battlefield, and you have to slowly kill your opponents turn after turn after turn while bouncing stuff at 4 damage apiece. It can feel really like, ugh, because it isn't a combo that just wins the game. It's a combo that wins the game 15 turns from now. I play it in my Brago deck. My friends don't have a problem with it, but just be aware of the politics of this situation. Not just the politics in that specific game, but the politics of your entire playgroup. So I keep mentioning how important it is for Brago to deal damage to your opponents, so let's talk about granting evasion to Brago. Brago already has evasion, he has flying. No, we need real evasion. So let's talk about Whirler Rogue. 2 blue for a 2/2 that comes with 2 colorless Thopter tokens, and when you tap 2 untapped artifacts you control, target creature can't be blocked this turn. Whirler Rogue is perfect. You can blink him to get an army of Thopters value, and you can still make Brago unblockable. It's an auto-include in this deck. Venser the Sojourner has a -1 activation that says creatures are unblockable this turn. He also has a +2 that's very relevant. Exile target permanent you own, return it to the battlefield under your control at the beginning of the next end step. See, 5 mana, creatures are unblockable is not a spell I want to cast. But you're going to find as you win game after game after game, your opponents start killing your Brago, and your deck slows down and doesn't work quite as well as it did before. It's still going to be powerful, and it's going to be powerful because you're going to have cards like Venser in the deck, which let you rebuy all of these enter the battlefield abilities without your commander. Thassa, God of the Sea, says 1 and a blue, target creature you control can't be blocked this turn. I also do really like the Scry. I'm a big fan of Thassa. There's a few other pieces of evasion. Let's talk about artifacts, specifically Whisper Silk Cloak, because this is the pinnacle artifact for this deck. The creature can't be blocked and has Shroud. This is exactly what we want. We want to protect Brago and get him in for damage. Now, Shroud means that you can't target Brago and blink him out and back in again to give him pseudo-vigilance, but that honestly doesn't matter. You're never blocking with Brago. And also, Whisper Silk Cloak and other pieces of equipment, if you attach them to non-Brago creatures, well, they get unattached when you blink them. Not ideal. But Whisper Silk Cloak and other equipments are so powerful, people run them all the time, including enter the battlefield cards that fetch them, like Stoneforge Mystic. You blink Stoneforge Mystic and you can just keep pulling equipment out of your deck. Or Trophy Mage if you're interested in just getting Whisper Silk Cloak. I'd also like to mention Blade of Selves. When you have enter the battlefield creatures and you multiply them out over all your opponents, getting all those triggers. It's a great feeling. And then Sword of Light and Shadow. Now I want to mention this because the swords are powerful. They give protection against some things, and sometimes they can give evasion because that protection can make them hard to block. And they have triggers when you deal combat damage. You're trying to get combat damage, but be very careful about the swords you use and how you use them, because protection goes both ways. If your creature has protection from blue, then Thassa's activated ability or Whirler Rogue's activated ability to give it unblockable won't work on that creature. So just be very aware of your protections and how they work against your opponent and how they help you out. But you don't have to go the equipment route. You could go the aura route. Steel of the Godhead, Unquestioned Authority, and Traveler's Cloak. That'll give great evasion. Steel of the Godhead pumps and gives some lifelink, but Unquestioned Authority and Traveler's Cloak also draw you a card. You can blink these auras out and then bring them back, reattaching them to your Brago, and keep drawing more and more cards. Let's take a diversion to talk about the rules. Yay, rules. Okay, this is actually an important interaction with this deck. When you blink your entire board with Brago, everything goes out at the same time and everything comes in at the same time. Then you do get to stack all of your triggers. But there's an important thing when you blink out and in things like auras, Unquestioned Authority, Traveler's Cloak, etc. It means that when it comes back in, it has to have a target, and other things coming back in with it are not legal targets. Now this doesn't matter very much because a lot of times you'll target Brago again, and you can choose not to blink out Brago. He doesn't really have a good enter the battlefield effect. But if you're looking to change targets for these auras, that target has to be on the battlefield when the aura enters. Clones will also work similarly. Clones are really powerful in this strategy anyways, because they also gain the enter the battlefield effect of the creature they are cloning, and you can always reset them to be the best creature on the battlefield. Now this isn't a problem if you're targeting a creature on someone else's board. You can keep having Clever Impersonator blink out and blink back in as their creature. But if you have the creature that you want to copy, you cannot blink both that creature and Clever Impersonator out at the same time and have them come back as the same thing. It just doesn't work. There's nothing for the Clever Impersonator to see on the battlefield to copy. Back to Evasion, I have a few budget cards that are great for getting Brago through. Drowner of Hope and Deep Fathom Skulker. Drowner of Hope also has the added benefit of being able to be blinked out and then put 2 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Scion creature tokens onto the battlefield. And you can sacrifice those Eldrazi Scions to tap down things that could be getting in Brago's way. Deep Fathom Skulker has an activated ability that can make Brago unblockable. And if you're attacking and getting in damage, drawing cards off of your Brago combat is just awesome. Now, mana and ramp is really important in every commander deck, but why is it more important in Brago? Well, it's because Brago can blink your mana rocks out, and then they come back onto the battlefield untapped, allowing you to get double mana out of every mana rock you have. So Mana Crypt, Mana Vault, Grim Monolith, Azorius Signet, Soul Ring, Gilded Lotus, all of these are great. And the downsides of cards like Mana Vault and Grim Monolith are diminished or negated because Brago's constantly going to be able to blink it back in, and that takes away the downside of having to untap your Grim Monolith for 4 mana or your Mana Vault on your upkeep for 4 mana. Now, one thing that you want to pay attention to is that Trophy Mage I mentioned before. It can fetch up a lot of these mana rocks. Actually, none of these mana rocks have converted mana cost 3 or less. One thing you can consider is a Trinket Mage instead. That'll get your Mana Crypt, your Mana Vault, and your Soul Ring, but I don't know if a lot of people are going to be going out and putting a Mana Crypt or a Mana Vault in this deck. Well, if you do have a Trophy Mage, which is pretty inexpensive, you can run really solid commander cards at 3 CMC, like Azorius Keyrune, Azorius Cluestone. Coalition Relic is pretty expensive, but man is it powerful, and Basalt Monolith. These are some great pieces of ramp that can tap in your first main phase and untap in your second main phase. The reason why I put all those other cards sort of above them is because they help you ramp out your Brago. And that is much more powerful if you could have a turn 3 Brago and then attack on turn 4 and then use all of that mana again. Remember, if you have a Basalt Monolith, you can have a Stronach Resonator and go infinite with colorless mana. Yay! But it's not just mana rocks that can generate you a lot of mana. Core Cartographer and Solemn Simulacrum can pull lands out of your deck, and cards like Peregrine Drake and Treachery can reset your lands with their really awesome Enter the Battlefield ability. Now I can't talk about Brago unless I talk about Stax. Stax. What is Stax? Well, Stax is named after Smokestack, and what it's supposed to do is tax your opponent in so many different ways so they find themselves really slowed down and locked out of interacting with what you're doing or even laying down their own threats. So let's look at a card like Tanglewire. It has Fading 4, and at the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player taps down an untapped artifact, creature, or land he or she controls for each fade counter on Tanglewire. So you play Tanglewire, it doesn't affect you the first turn, and then it goes around the table and everyone has to tap down 4 things. It just slows down the game so much, especially if you get this out early. Then when it comes time for your turn, you make sure that you take the fading counter off first and then you tap down your stuff. And one of the things that you tap is the Tanglewire. So really you only have to tap 2 important things. Now, this is not a very powerful card because it goes away so quickly. In Commander, the games last a really long time, so slowing the game down for 3 turns isn't that impactful. But when you can blink Tanglewire turn after turn after turn with your Brago, that means that everyone is always tapping down 4 things, and you're only tapping down 2 things. You can also tax your opponent's mana with a card like Parallax Tide. You can slowly remove the relevant pieces of mana from your opponent, and then when the fading's about to go away, you blink it with Brago so you can do it all over again. This also has the added trick of Parallax Tiding your own tapped lands, then flickering it with Brago, and when your lands come back into play, they come back in untapped. This can be great for getting around a classic Stax card called Stasis. There's no untap step, but you have to pay a blue every turn, so you have to either find a way to get around this no untapping at all. But if you have your deck built around it, you can cripple your opponents. Let's look at a few more tap abilities. Winter Orb. As long as Winter Orb is untapped, players can't untap more than 1 land during their untap steps. Oh, it just slows the game down so much. You find you're waiting turn after turn after turn to just add another land to the battlefield. And a lot of the great fixing in Commander, like Tri-lands or Scry-lands, they will automatically enter the battlefield tapped, not really generating any mana for opponent's land drop. Static Orb also says, as long as Static Orb is untapped, players can't untap more than 2 permanents during their untap steps. See, where Winter Orb is weak is that there are so many mana rocks in the format, but Static Orb also addresses that issue. Ugh. There's another angle of taxing your opponent, and that's with cards like Rhystic Study, but more importantly, Mystic Remora. This only costs 1 blue. It has a cumulative upkeep of 1, so eventually this will get out of hand and we won't be able to afford to pay for it anymore. But whenever an opponent, by the way, it says target opponent on the card, but it's any opponent, successfully casts a non-creature spell, you may draw a card unless that player pays 4. No one's gonna pay 4. You're gonna draw a card off of this. Often you'll draw lots of cards off of this. And you know what? You can blink it out with Brago and then reset that cumulative upkeep. So the only thing you have to do is pay 1 each turn to keep this powerful enchantment around. Azorius Justicar, Frost Titan, and Lavinia of the 10th can also lock things down on your opponent's board. The Justicar says you can detain up to 2 target creatures your opponents control. They can attack, block, or use activated abilities. Frost Titan can lock down any permanent on their battlefield. And Lavinia of the 10th, well, she comes in and detains each non-land permanent CMC 4 or less. That means 4 or less planeswalkers can't activate, creatures can't attack, Mana rocks get locked down. If you keep blinking Lavinia, man, you've crippled your opponent. Stonehorn Dignitary reads, when he enters the battlefield, target opponent skips his or her next combat phase. With a blink, you can prevent an opponent from attacking every single turn for the rest of the game. Oh my gosh, that just destroys certain decks. Now there's another series of cards that's a little bit Stax-ish that is mean but powerful. It's the Rishadan cycle. Rishadan Brigand, Rishadan Footpad, Rishadan Cutpurse. And all of them read, when they enter the battlefield, each opponent sacrifices a permanent unless they pay some mana cost, 3, 2, or 1. And if you're blinking this, then they always have to keep this mana up or else keep sacrificing permanents. Okay, let's leave Stax behind. There's plenty of other avenues to go down and it can be really fun, but your meta has to be prepared for this kind of deck. I want to go on to something a little bit less competitive, but I find a lot of fun, and that's the enchantments. I am a huge fan of Manifest in this deck. Mastery Unseen, Cloudform, Lightform, they're just great. And let's look at Cloudform and Lightform because they're particularly special. When they enter the battlefield, they become auras that attach to a thing that you manifest off the top of your library. A little bit complicated, but fine. You end up with a 2/2 flyer with something else, whatever. But then, when you decide to blink things with Brago, you can blink that manifested creature, and you can blink the enchantment. So what happens? They both leave, and when they come back, the manifested creature is no longer manifested. It becomes whatever it is. If it's a sorcery or an instant, well, too bad, it goes away. But if it's a land, it enters as a land. If it's a creature or an artifact, it comes straight in like that. And when the enchantment comes back, it will then manifest another creature. This can cheat huge mana costs. I mean, just imagine if you have an Ulamog underneath a light form or any other huge things underneath a light form. You blink it out and suddenly you have an Ulamog and your light form keeps manifesting things. I really wish that these two were auras and not just enchantments because there's a lot of great auras. I'm going to put Heliod's Pilgrim up here because it can fetch auras out of your library. I already mentioned Unquestioned Authority and Traveler's Cloak. I want to throw in Pentarch Ward because all of these will draw you a card when they enter the battlefield, but also give some level of evasion or protection. Steal the Godhead is something else I mentioned, but also Aqueous Form gives that evasion. And Heliod's Pilgrim can fetch all of these auras out of your library to make them relevant and put them on Brago, and then you can flicker Heliod's Pilgrim to get even more auras. Let's go to another aura fetcher, Totem Guide Heartbeast, and some more auras that you can get, Spreading Seas. I don't really care if you turn something into an island, but you can blink this and keep drawing cards. Or Faith's Fetters. Again, it's not terribly powerful to spend 4 mana to remove a permanent, but when you can switch Faith's Fetters around to whatever permanent you want, and when it comes back you gain 4 life every time, suddenly that's starting to sound a lot better. Especially because it's an aura and can be fetched by these great creatures. And now I have to mention one of the best auras in the deck that everyone plays in Brago, Reality Acid. Let's take a closer look. 2 and a blue for an enchant permanent with Vanishing 3, and when it leaves play, enchanted permanent's controller sacrifices it. That means that you can attach this aura to anything, blink it out with Brago, and then your opponent has to sacrifice it, and Reality Acid can come right back again on another permanent. This is destroying any permanent every single turn. It's pretty oppressive. Another popular inclusion are O-ring effects like Detention Sphere or Grasp of Fate. These are just so-so because they'll exile something, but then if you blink them, whatever's exiled underneath it will come back again. What makes these worth a mention is that if you Detention Sphere their commander, well, they have to decide, do I put this in the command zone or do I leave it under the Detention Sphere? Because if they put it in the command zone, you can blink Detention Sphere and get something else. But if they leave it under Detention Sphere, then you can just choose never to blink it, and then it's stuck there, and your opponent's like, oh, where's my commander? I need to find removal, and it can be really frustrating for them. This effect, and Detention Sphere in particular, is also really great against tokens. I also like Grasp of Fate because it's kind of the multiplayer version of this. Brago blinks our creatures. But like I mentioned with Venser, we might not always have access to Brago, especially when your opponents realize how good your deck is. So we're going to want some Blink redundancy, Momentary Blink and Ghostly Flicker. They can protect your Brago from removal, but also blink relevant creatures. Two powerhouses of this deck are Eerie Interlude and Ghost Away. The reason why is because you need a lot of things on the battlefield for Brago to go well. You don't just want to blink Brago, you want to blink your artifacts and your enter the battlefield creatures and lots of stuff, which means you're particularly susceptible to board wipes. And Eerie Interlude and Ghost Away can save you from a board wipe while triggering all of the enter the battlefield abilities again. They can save your board and give you value at the same time. Really must-have inclusions. There's also a few creatures that can help save stuff or trigger things. Miss Meadow Witch can act like a slow, fair version of Deadeye Navigator that I mentioned earlier. And Restoration Angel's really nice because of that flash. It's kind of that gotcha moment where you can trigger another ETB or save a creature. I want to mention one last thing before we go. Brago is filled with value, will dirtle around, blink stuff, and everything will be really fun, but it really has a hard time winning. So make sure that you have enough powerful creatures to close out the game when you're in a dominant position. And that's going to do it for Brago King Eternal. This has been an extra long YouTube video, so I'm going to end it really soon. I hope you really like this deck. I'm going to place two versions on Tapped Out. One of them is going to be sort of a Staxy expensive version, and the other one's going to be a solid budget version. So hopefully you'll all find something that you really like in Brago. I gotta say, it's flexible, there's tons of options to choose from, different price points, and a lot of really fun gameplay. Thanks very much for watching. I'll see you guys soon.